Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 168 of the Peak of Serenity podcast. I am, as always, one of your hosts, Emerson, and joining me, we have my co host, Namali.
Hello.
And this week, we are catching up on a couple of weeks of news, and we've got, I think, two big topics. First
Yeah.
is what is now become known as the God Comp, which got nerfed
Zodia.
and is still the God Comp.
Not enough.
Yep. And then also some combat log stuff, which is
Yes.
sort of very much in my wheelhouse. So we're going to talk a little bit about outside auras and the damage meter stuff as well.
Yes.
So yeah, but before we get into that, how was raid? How was raid, Anam?
Yeah, this is our first Reclear week. So raid it went better than expected, but not great. So had a little bit of a rough go on Rashok, I'll say. So I guess I should preface our raid is fighting the roster boss fairly hard at this point. To
Oh
the tune of
yeah,
like us bringing in like just a casual member who used to raid with us like back
yeah,
in Legion and like she's been helping out. So yeah, no, it's definitely like the roster boss and like just final summer vacations are sort of hitting us where like I think we right now are rocking like 23 people on roster.
yeah,
Only four main healers. So like one
yeah.
main healer doesn't show up, it's an alt. And so but no, Rashok, I mean, we basically cleared up through Magmarax, put in about probably 2.5 hours, maybe 3 hours on Niltharion, got him low towards the end of the night, but didn't get the kill on Neltharion, but did clear basically everything else. First re-clear back, first time doing like literally Magmarax. Like I think five people got the achievement for killing Magmarax for the first
Right.
time. Zakarn even I think we had like three or four people do the same. So um definitely was an interesting to re-clear. Yeah, and I just remembering how to do the fights. Like I didn't like I forgot how to do forgotten experiments, like particularly the dispelling, which was like my role.
Yeah,
I was like, when do I dispel again? Like,
yeah,
what is the timing on this? So, but no, it was fun to get back in there, do a little bit of re-clear. Still rocking the monk because we don't have another healer, but yeah, no, re-clear wasn't bad. So didn't get the full in, which sucks. But I think that was, I mean, generally, I feel like our first re-clear after we kill an M boss, we never full clear. Like it's been a while. Even like
yeah.
been a
That's
while
how
since we did
ours
that.
our first week clear was too, and actually, unfortunately, pretty similar to how ours was this week as well. So
Ooh,
last week we did get all the way through. We re-killed everything. We killed Sarkareth for a second time. We got some more CEs. That's all
nice.
great. This week we just spent 4 hours on Neltharion again,
Oh, nice.
and then didn't re-kill Sarkareth.
Oh,
So that's frustrating. And we have
yeah.
stuff we're gonna be doing to changes. We also got bit a little bit on Thursday. There was a weak auras update that if you had done the update, you needed to update your Neltharion map weak aura.
Oh, right.
And so the act of updating your Neltharion map weak aura, of course, introduces the chance that it will just not function. So
Yes.
we had bunch of people with weak aura issues this week as well.
Oh,
And
that's
then
not good.
we also had a little bit of roster shenanigans uh on Friday where we just had three late call outs for just various reasons.
Yeah, sucks. Yeah, yeah. It's definitely like not getting the re-clearing hurts. I think at this point with like the way that, particularly like once you like full clear at once, you're like, we should just be doing this every week, easy. And like, yeah,
Yeah,
it's not always that easy.
not
It's
not
always
so
rough. So
simple.
yeah. Um, but that sucks, man. I'm sorry. Well, at least I mean you got one full re-clear, and last week you'll eventually what
Yeah,
get the skip next week maybe.
yeah.
You
It
get back
does
through it. So
it does suck. Our We have an evoker who has main evoker the whole tier, does not have the legendary. Okay. We have
yeah,
three people that rerolled to evoker after prog. One preservation, two augmentation. They all have the legendary.
that's awful.
And So we want to re-kill Sarkareth in part to get them the max bad luck protection so they can finally get their fucking legendary.
Yeah, yeah,
It is
yeah.
actually a travesty that Blizzard did not do any like retroactive BLP for like all of the clears of Sarkareth that they had already done.
Yeah.
They like starting from zero bad luck protection after having killed Sarkareth on every difficulty every week until they told everybody 8 weeks into the
Yeah.
tier that you only had to kill the highest one
Right, yeah.
and then killing that one every week from there, and just then to start from zero bad luck protection, watch every other evoker reroll get the legendary, and it's just like this was bad.
That's rough.
The way that they
Yeah.
handled the evoker legendary this tier was extremely bad.
Yeah. Yeah. That's I mean, that's why we still clear heroic just as like a like quick thing. Like at the start of our one of our raids, we'll go in and do like a quick heroic clear. I think primarily because we still need some like heroic trinkets even.
Yeah,
So there's
we
still upgrades.
OCE
But
for us. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. But yeah. It's whew, it's crazy. So but yeah, no, that's I mean, hopefully next week's a little bit cleaner. I really hope this week's clear for us. We have a couple of new recruits coming in, so we'll see how they'll do. And then
Yeah.
no healer yet, but we'll see. We'll see. So um well, cool. Maybe we can move a little bit into the week's interview. I guess this week and last week. I mean, to be fair, not a ton of news over the past couple weeks. It's been, I mean, I think our two main topics are the big thing that's come out, but a couple of quick hitters here. So late to the party. I think this was announced maybe like almost a week ago now. We do have a release date for 10.17. So 10.17 release date was announced, coming out September 5th. So in just a couple of short weeks, which is cool, I guess. It seems like they are sticking to their timelines, at least up until now.
Yeah.
With 10.17 hitting early fall, which means 10.2, which was a fall target on the roadmap, probably something we get towards the end of, like maybe like November-ish timeline again. Hopefully not another December raid release. That would be terrible.
Yep. They also
But
have to
maybe like a
contend with BlizzCon conflicts, right? Because that's the beginning
yes.
of November.
Yeah, so I'm thinking maybe like another post BlizzCon, like week or two before Thanksgiving type release. I
Yeah,
think makes US
that makes
Thanksgiving
sense.
sense. But yeah, no. So they've been sticking to it, and of course, 10.17, not a ton. Well, a couple of I think big things. I think the ping system
Yeah.
super good, but outside of that, I mean, more catch up events, not that exciting, and I guess the mega dungeons getting split, and you get heroic mode of it. But yeah,
Yeah, this
not a ton
is
of crazy stuff.
in contrast to 10.07, which brought with it the Onyx Amulet, the Firbolg Trinket, which was briefly the most broken thing in the game,
Yeah.
uh, and stuff like being able to play certain race class combinations that weren't available before.
Mhm.
Um, there's not really anything for like if you like world events, great. If you like doing the story quests, great. If you aren't invested in either of those things, there's really not a whole lot.
Yeah,
Um,
I'm still finishing up the story from I think 10.15 on my monk actually.
I still have not done the Valdrakken story quests from 10.0, the like ones that you get
Nice.
from unlocking later renown levels, because it took
Yeah.
me so long to actually get that renown, because it was a like that renown just didn't have any unlocks that were relevant to me at all, so I just put zero time into it.
Yeah, exactly.
Uh,
Exactly.
so like 100% of my rep game with Valdrakken was from the weekly quest that awarded Iskara and what's
Yeah.
it called? The Centaur rep.
Oh yeah, the mag something. Always mag something.
But yeah, the that said, like we've talked about on this podcast before, that I like the Final Fantasy model of not every patch is for every player, but there's more patches, so there's just always more stuff flowing into the game, and that is what they're doing here. This patch is not for every player, and that's fine,
Yeah.
right? Uh,
Yeah.
so
I think we'll talk a little bit about the ping system in a minute, but yeah, that's
Yeah,
probably the biggest thing coming out. Um, so 10.17 September 5th, get ready. A little bit of content. Of course, a couple of balance things going in there. So like Manatee from Mistweaver will come in. So yeah, be interesting to see. Um, the other big announcement is Hardcore Realms in Classic WoW got announced. So we haven't talked much about. I think you and I dabbled in. I think I talked a little bit about me. I was leveling something in Hardcore, which was fun. Got to level 25, 30 ish. Sort of quit once it became like an official thing, and now we have an official launch date. So it's
yep,
August 24th, which I believe is a Friday
yep,
at or Thursday. I'm sorry, actually at 3 p.m. Pacific, 6 p.m. Eastern time. If you're in Europe, do the math. I think UK, that'd be like 11 p.m. on the 24th in the UK. So Classic Realms have an announced date and they're coming out, which will be fun. I think playing leveling in Classic, I think we've both talked about this, is like still the best part of Classic. Rating and sort of the max level content is pretty one note. It's pretty simple. If you have a pulse and can hit like fireball or frostbolt if you're a mage over and over again for 3 minutes, then you've basically mastered all the rotational complexity of that. And it's just finding 30 other people that can do the same thing.
yeah,
But the leveling experience I think is really fun. So I'm a little bit excited. I'll say I'm less excited about this because of some other stuff coming out, but still
yeah.
I'll probably slowly level something. I don't know what yet because I've done a mage. I have a hunter that like I dabbled in that made it to like level 19. And I have a priest that died at level 10.
Yeah.
Um,
I
so
have I have yet to cross the level 20 mark just due to a mix of greed and some really unfortunate rare elite spawns.
yeah.
Like I had a mage that I got up I was like level 18 in Silver Pine. Pro tip, don't go to Silver Pine. What's his face? The rare elite Worgen just spawned
Yes.
next to me and
Oh, it's so good.
and
It's so
like
good.
what do you do? just
Yeah.
just what do you do? I'll tell you what you do. You don't go to zones that can have a rare elite spawn next to you.
Yeah. Yeah. No,
So
yeah, that
rare
was
elite like skull icon level like just absolutely wrecked me.
that's so funny. That's yeah, I mean that the leveling is I think that'll be the part that like if I can get a class to 60, that'll be where I stop. Like I'll
Yeah,
basically get to
yeah,
60 and end. I won't sort of care about the end game, um but yeah, no, it's a super cool. So it's super cool that it's launching on the 24th. One thing they did say, which funnily enough, like purists are a little bit upset about this, but I don't really care too much, is that if you do die on your hardcore character, you get a free transfer to one of the error realms. So like you can still play that character, just no longer on the hardcore server, which I think
this
is
is
fair and fine.
yeah.
Like,
I think this is different from how, for example, Diablo games handle hardcore.
yeah,
Hardcore character is dead when it's dead. You can't transfer it to a softcore realm or anything like that. It's just gone. It's actually more similar, kind of, to a seasonal character. In
yeah.
those games, where season ends and you can move it to the normal realm. But I think that's probably partially just because of how much more time you invest in leveling a character in WoW, right? Like leveling a fresh character in Diablo, any Diablo, is on the order of like 10 hours if you're doing it
Even
solo.
Yeah, I mean, and then once you get somebody to run you through, it's literally like 90 minutes of just sitting in
Yeah.
rifts for like in
Yeah.
Diablo 3. So yeah, yeah,
And so that's a little bit different from hitting level 15 probably takes you 10 hours if you're not like super optimized in classic WoW.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's a lot bigger time investment. So I think it's a cool way to like if you actually are uh tied to the class, um, or like the character that you created, then you get to continue to play it, which I think is a nice little addition there. But yeah,
Yeah.
free transfers off of the hardcore realms if you do die for those characters, which is a nice little thing for Blizzard to put in there. I think too it sort of helps if you die in like we'll say like a less than exciting way, like you get disconnected or like some sort of like mob bugs out on top of you. Because I
Or a rare
don't,
elite spawns on you.
yeah,
There
I
are a
don't
few
think
of those
Blizzard's gonna.
in higher level zones too.
Yeah, exactly. So, and I don't think Blizzard's gonna roll many people back
Yeah.
because of that. So, but yeah, hardcore the 24th. My problem is it. So I've personally been getting kind of deep into Wrath Classic. So
Oh
like,
yeah.
yeah, I've been raiding in Wrath Classic,
Oh
which
no.
is yeah, it's like the hooks. I don't know. And then PoE comes out this Friday. So there's, gotta try the new PoE league. But yeah, no, it's classic on the 24th will be fun. Um and then cool. And then the only other final sort of week in review piece from the last couple weeks was just they did update the ping system in 10.17. So ping system, we talked about this a couple times, but it's sort of the idea of being able to like just quickly put a little ping on the map or sorry, ping in the world that your party or raid will be able to see. They basically added like a quick ping versus like specific ping system where if you tap the ping button, it'll drop a quick ping on wherever your cursor is. And then if you hold it, you get the radial button to like select the type of ping you want, and then you can select it and drop it. So very similar to how other games have handled their ping system, where it's like quick ping is just, I guess in like battle royales, typically it's like a contextual ping. You have
Yeah.
it over an enemy, it'll be a attack thing, or it'll just be a regular one, and then or you can click and hold the button and get a radial menu for like a specific ping type, which is cool. So yeah, ping system updates. I'm a huge fan of this. So excited to mess around with this once it's live.
Yeah.
And then for you, the one thing you said in our pre-show that you were really excited about, which I didn't even think was a big deal,
Oh
was
yeah.
that Tuskar tackle boxes can be toggled on and off from a tracking perspective with
All
Find
right.
Fish.
Really
So
excited is maybe overselling it, but for those of you that are high renowned with the Tuskar, which is starting to become a lot of people at this point in the expansion,
mhm.
you will know that Tuskar tackle boxes are everywhere. Everywhere. You are constantly bombarded in the overworld of the Dragonflight zones with the treasure icons for Tuskar tackle boxes. If you are flying around trying to find stuff to open up to try and get your profession weekly items out of the treasure boxes, as far as I know, you cannot get those from the Tuskar tackle boxes. So you're actually looking and like mousing over your mini map trying to find the ones that aren't that. Um, but now you can toggle those off by toggling find fish, which is kind of funny. And also you need find fish to turn it off, which is not, I don't think, free. I think you still have to get the skill book for that.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Maybe you don't need the skill book anymore. I don't remember, but it's not hard to get the skill book. At least they're really cheap on the auction house too. So
Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, no more. Yeah, you get to turn off all those treasure icons next patch if you'd like. Um, well, cool. I think that's everything from the last weeks. Like I said, there wasn't a ton of news that had come out or things that had sort of been released. I think the release of the patch was the big one, the date for that, and then the date
yeah,
for hardcore, also the big one. Which is, to be fair, for me, a lot sooner than I thought they'd get it out. But it's awesome that they were able to get the rule set in. I
yeah,
still think people are going to lose characters to quests they've forgotten to update, like quests where you die or have to die, and I think that's going to still kill a couple people. But no, yeah,
maybe, maybe
yeah,
so.
it's cool that they're getting all that stuff out there. So, um, awesome. Well, then on to I guess maybe our main two topics of today, and something that is near and dear to my heart, kind of not really, is the Mythic Plus meta. So if you've been living under a rock or don't play WoW, you probably don't realize this, but if you've played WoW at all in probably the past, month or two, you've noticed that pretty much every Mythic Plus group higher than a plus 11 is looking for basically one of five classes for whatever reason. So it's either going to be a paladin to heal, a druid to tank, and a mage, an evoker, or a shadow priest to DPS. And so that's sort of your quote unquote God comp, Exodia comp, whatever you want to term it. There's a bunch of websites out there. I think like there's a website that's sort of tracking the top 2,000 runs per week and what the class breakdown is. Very interesting that it's now just like literally nothing but
Yeah,
those five classes in those roles. So, but yeah, so we have a God comp. We have basically, what many are calling like one of the best sort of groups of five classes put together, probably the most overpowered version of a Mythic Plus comp that we've seen in terms of like a meta. And yeah, it's dominating basically every key at the extremely high level, and then of course that trickles down into what makes up the meta for everybody else, right? That
Yeah.
now people are trying to get their weekly 15s done, no lever 15s done, but they need an augmentation evoker. They're not going into that dungeon because they need that apparently to get those dungeons done. So
Yeah.
um
So augmentation is super good. Like the common underlying theme of these classes is they are all super good. All of them are good. Um, the kind of distinctive piece is definitely the augmentation evoker, pushing everything else up. They already wait, did they nerfed well, we'll talk about nerfs. They nerfed this comp last week.
mhm,
And it wasn't enough. It just straight up wasn't enough. The same comp is still dominating everything else. And I don't exactly know. Like, I don't think it's that Fire Mage and Shadow Priest have any specific interaction with Augmentation Evoker.
mhm.
I think it's just that they're just the best ones to fill the spot. And
Yeah.
for example, if you would have used a rogue for the shroud skips, Mage can now bring that with Mass Invis as well, along with Mage having they're playing Fire Mage specifically, so it's got Cauterize as a cheat death. So there's Augmentation Evoker, notably, uh,
Yep.
as well as stuff like Mass Barrier if you don't need the Mass Invis, and just a ton of utility across the board, and
Yeah.
extremely good AoE damage and single target damage.
Yeah. I think that's the thing is that like every one of these classes, like because priest also brings that utility and like PI from like a damage point of view, but then also
Right.
like mass dispel for like any nasty debuffs and
Yep.
things like that. Dispersion is a really good defensive. I mean, Holy Paladin is extremely tanky in terms of like being able to mitigate damage, but then also they do a ton of damage and healing.
Right. And they
Um,
are perhaps the only healer that could maybe currently be called a triage healer.
Yeah, exactly. Which is the other thing about, and it was one of the topics I thought we could fit in, but I don't think we have enough time. Which, yeah, healing in general right now is all either you survive the hit or you die, and then if you survive it, you need to be healed up quickly. And like,
Right.
yeah,
And
and for the next
that's
one, it's
one of our pain points in raid this tier was basically no healer was a triage healer, so if one person took more damage for whatever reason, just like they needed to use their own buttons, which on the one hand is okay, but on the other, some classes don't have buttons or don't have as many
yes,
buttons.
I have
Uh,
one.
Combined with the fact that our comp did not have basically any damage reduction cooldowns, so we were using personals as a DR cooldown, and that means that then they didn't have it for when they took extra damage. But yeah, so then there's of course adding into this god comp, we have Guardian Druid. After the wildfire, very good at just like dumping out HPS on the group. Incarnation lets you do some really silly pulls. And just passively all the time, Guardian Druid has a pretty high degree of tankiness, which has definitely
Mhm.
been like I've been doing like 24s and 25s this week on my monk, and it you could definitely feel the like I'm not gonna call it squishiness because it's like variance. And this is never a problem that Brewmaster has had, but sometimes you just get hit a lot, right? We're very reliant on
Yeah,
dodge, especially with our current tier set. Sometimes you just get hit a lot, and we have low armor. Actually, fun note: Augmentation Evoker's armor buff almost doubles my armor, which is
that's amazing.
part of the reason that Augmentation feels like very good when playing Brewmaster in Key.
Yeah,
And just in general, like you can feel that sometimes you just take a spike of damage for no apparent reason. Like just you don't dodge multiple attacks in a row while you're GCD locked and you can't generate more elusive brawler stacks. And then the like the only real way to counterplay that is potentially to just switch your stat allocation around to maybe get some more mastery and push
Hmm.
it to the point that like you're guaranteed to dodge more frequently. But it's still, or not even like you don't need the guarantee. It's just like you boost your overall dodge rate by putting points into mastery. It is just you
Yeah.
don't have the same level of consistency that just like passively having a absolutely ludicrous amount of armor. I don't know if Guardian Druid is currently capable of hitting armor cap with Iron Fur, but I know they historically have been able to pretty much every tier of BFA they were able to after Uldir. And then most of Shadowlands, I believe they're also able to. So
Hmm.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think and to that point, every one of these, and this is where I think the augmentation comes, is every one of these classes, or really every class in general, gets stronger, like with just having either like more main stat, or to be fair, like the largest thing is like augmentation has a lot of just like group wide like damage reduction, or like because their personal cooldown also gives, damage reduction to your group.
It's a mini
Um
rally effect when they
yeah.
hit Obsidian Scale. So the group gets 8% extra HP.
Yeah, healthy, yeah. So I mean it's I think it's when you couple augmentation with then, priests, the utility priests and damage priests are doing similar with mages, the damage mages are doing, and then the paladin and the druid, right? Like it's essentially a very extremely strong comp, right? Like even before this, we were talking about like, I think we brought this up where like, anecdotally, like doing a key with an augmentation evoker is basically like doing a key like at one less level, right? So if you're like, man, that 20 was really rough, you add an augmentation evoker, it'll feel like a 19,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so like, yeah, it'll be interesting to see how this moves forward, in terms of like Blizzard buffing and nerfing it, because and I think we said this like right as augmentation was announced and came out, is like augmentation rides that fine line of either being required or like you never bring one because they're a liability. And like
Yeah.
it is so hard to nail that, I think, for
Yeah.
Blizzard, that I don't know if they ever get there, right? I think in a raid, it's not a big a deal to like basically have a mandatory augmentation, because you have 19 other spots you can, or you have 19 other people you can bring, and finding one is potentially enough. But yeah, in five mans it's a different beast altogether on how to do that balance. They're just not there yet with it, right? So I mean, the hopeful part of me is that Blizzard's been really good about making balance changes all expansion. They've been very quick about either changing things or just like trying to make adjustments. And so hopefully that continues
Yeah.
with this. But yeah, their latest last week's round, and there was nothing for this week coming up. So I mean,
Yeah.
it's gonna be God
So
Comp for a little bit.
to kind of like highlight how far ahead this comp was, right? The previous round of nerfs, which was 9 days ago at this point, so this would have been August 4th. Unfortunately, we had our 2 week podcast break, so this was posted on Friday of the week before last and went into the game with last week's reset. Um, they nerfed Fire Mage by 10%, basically just across the board. Their AoE damage, Flame Strike, Flame Platch, Flagration, Meteor, Phoenix Flames, Living Bomb, 10% nerf, just all of them. They also nerfed AoE from Frost Mage. They nerfed Holy Paladin, 5% reduced healing. Uh,
Easy.
Nerfed DRs, nerfed their like overflowing light absorbs, nerfed Tears Deliverance, nerfed Blessing of Summer. Like they're very substantial nerfs, and it's still the same comp.
Yeah.
They did not nerf Shadow Priest. I don't think. Oh wait, yes they did. Vampiric Touch, damage reduced by 20%. Shadow Word Pain,
Yeah, they got big
15%.
nerfs for their touch.
Shadowy
Yeah.
Apparition, 15%. Uh, along with nerfing the healing of Vampiric Embrace, and the cooldown reduction of Vampiric Embrace, and they nerfed Guardian damage. Not survivability, which I think honestly is. I would prefer them to improve the passive tankiness of some other tank specs rather than just gutting Guardian survivability, right? Like maybe give Brewmaster a little bit more armor or something to offset. Like buffing stagger is extremely dangerous. You buff stagger too
Hmm.
much and things get really, really crazy really fast. So I don't know that a stagger buff is the correct way to do it, but
Hmm.
primarily worried about auto attacks. Maybe it's just extra armor, right?
Yeah, that's
Um,
true.
and then they also nerfed Evoker, although finally the augmentation nerfs are some of the smallest nerfs. Uh,
Yeah.
they took 5% off of Breath of Aeons and Fate Mirror.
Yeah. It's
Um,
like mostly inconsequential
I
in the
mean,
grand scheme of
it
things.
is a nerf, but it is kind of funny that they just like augmentation is the best part of that comp.
Yeah, and they're yeah, it's that's what I'm saying is like I don't think they know exactly how to bring it down, so they're just gonna make these like what look like minor to no adjustments, and
Yeah,
eventually they'll get it right.
yeah,
So yeah. Um, the other thing I wanted to touch on, so now we've gone through sort of the nerfs and stuff. I wanted to sort of talk about some of just the commentary around this because I think that's like the interesting part. And so like what people are generally and this is I'll echo what people in my guild have said because I think that's the closest I'll be because this generally what I've seen comes from kind of one of two people, right? It's number one, you're the group of folks that are going to push to get seasonal titles or to like get up there in terms of ratings. You get those titles, just want to push in general. It's like a fun thing to do in the game. And the other piece is like for your like pug players, for your player that like just wants to get a couple 15s done, get a vault, ready and locked in and be good to go. Or I guess it would be 6, right, for the crest. Um and and sort of the problem with this comp and how good it is, how much better it is than like other groups of players is that number one, they dropped Evoker in the middle of the season, like augmentation evokers in the middle of the season, which means
yeah,
like if you're not like if you were trying to push and you didn't get lucky to be a part of this composition, then like your season's over, right? Like you're not gonna as
yeah,
people re-roll and pile in and sort of follow the meta, like if you're sort of a one character type player, you're like not gonna reach that limit, right? But then at the
yeah,
same time, if you think about it, you've had I think it was what 3 weeks before, maybe 2 weeks before the nerfs hit. So any players who were pushing basically or already had geared, fire mages, shadow priests, druids, whatever the god comp was, and now have pushed keys into like the high 29s, 28s, those numbers aren't going to get hit the rest of the season.
yeah.
So like the idea is now like if you've locked in those ratings, like you're good to go potentially for a seasonal title, regardless of if you play the rest of the year, rest of the season. Sorry.
Yeah,
Um,
it's a really awkward thing. Where like from a raid perspective, I think the timing was good. It means that
yeah.
augmentation didn't break the race to world first. It didn't have an impact on high ranks for progress guilds.
Yep.
And it in some ways is a nice little nerf to the raid for lower rank guilds. People can swap to augmentation evoker and
Hmm.
act as kind of a force multiplier and just bring a lot of goodies that make fights go more smoothly.
Hmm.
Stuff like letting your like holy priests walk around while channeling what's it called him
Yep.
things
Yeah.
like that. Um, and that's nice, but then you're absolutely right from the like Mythic Plus perspective. What did they do? Like eh, people were able to push so much higher with these comps
Yeah.
that you like what do you do?
Yeah, exactly. And like, do you reset rankings? And that's sort of the other. I think that conversation sort of I can see the negative part of that, right?
Yeah,
Like the idea of like you didn't get this in, that you're essentially time gated on your goal of getting a one of the seasonal ranks, one of like the 0.1% titles,
right.
right? Um, you were time gated and like you didn't get your runs in. And so that's I think maybe the to me the larger issue here. Like I am 100% supportive of Blizzard like introducing specs in the middle of a patch cycle, not waiting for expansions because I think that's super cool. I'm 100% behind them making as many balancing changes as they want. That's super cool. But like be fair, I don't care about the titles, but I understand the frustration of a player like you are pushing for a
Yeah,
title every season, and that's what you want to do. Of like being like, well, crap, like my survival hunter, like not even survival, but like my hunter didn't reroll to Shadow Priest in time, didn't get geared up enough, so we never got a chance
Yeah.
to push, and now we're screwed because
Yeah.
they've nursed us enough that we'll never hit 29s or 30s, whatever the max
Yeah.
was that those couple weeks. So yeah, I mean that to me is sort of the biggest issue in all of this is just like Blizzard has affected like the titles at the end of the season, which
Yeah.
it's like I chase mounts as like my raid thing. That's what I like to do in the game. I don't chase titles, but at the same time, I understand that chase, and that sucks for those players that are now essentially like I wouldn't say screwed is the right word, but like they didn't get the timing in there right.
Yeah.
Now they can't get the title. So,
I was trying to
but
find somebody linked a if they did spec specific title cutoffs, what the rating cutoff would be for each spec.
I would love to see Mistweavers because it's probably super low. I bet you maybe I even get it at like my typical like 23, 2500 ish score,
I don't
which
think
is
quite so much because you have to
okay.
keep in mind it would then be 0.1% of your spec. So
Oh, okay. So
lower
it'd be a little bit higher.
population
Yeah, yeah.
means
Lower
yeah, so
number.
it's a
Yeah, yeah.
little
Fair enough.
bit self-correcting in that way. But even then, like the cutoff for Brewmaster, if they did it that way, would have been almost 200 points lower than the
Yeah,
cutoff
yeah.
for Guardian Druid.
That's wild. That's wild. Yeah. Yeah, so I mean maybe that's the way they do it with titles moving forward. I don't know. Like it just well not moving forward, but I maybe for this season cuz I think this season might be hopefully the only one where they make I wouldn't call this a mistake, but make this choice to like do the changes they did.
Yeah, I
Which
mean, I think
to
that
be
they like obviously they underestimated the power of augmentation pretty badly, right?
yeah.
And some of that is that it went live. Like they, so for those that maybe don't know the history of like the combat log is something that was actually a Blizzard internal tool, basically. Like they would write out the combat log and they would use that to, I don't know what their internal tool was like, but like that's what it was for, right? The
Mhm.
ability for players to write out the combat log existed basically because they didn't see a reason to turn it off.
Yeah.
And so then other things like, back in the day, World of Logs and things like that, and now Warcraft Logs using that combat log for rankings and things like that is, well, I mean, depends on your perspective on game two, but we'll call it a happy side effect of their internal tooling existing.
Mhm.
And so the fact that augmentation evokers weren't having damage redistributed in the combat log effectively means that their internal tooling was defective. Their internal tooling that maybe they rely on for being able to understand damage output just didn't work while they were
Yeah.
tuning and designing the spec. And um, I'm saying all of this as an outsider, right? Like I don't actually know what their internal tooling looks like. I just know that like the combat log is not something that was added to
Right. Yeah.
enable things like World of Logs, right? Like it's always existed. It's just
Yeah.
you know used for other things internal. But and maybe they have other tools that don't rely on that, right? Like
Yeah, I mean, they probably can see. I mean, they definitely probably have other ways to collect data off of like what players are doing in the game, whether
right,
that's like logs right off the server, like
yeah.
things like that. So, but yeah, no, I
But
mean that's. But you're right. Like without that sort of without all those hooks set up, and I mean they're still broken. Like attribution for certain classes is still. I mean healers
yeah,
across the board
there's
don't
a
get
there's
any
a
of their
bug
real.
list in both the Evoker Discord and in the Warcraft Logs Discord, pinned in one of the channels. And then
Yeah,
there's also like this coincided with Holy Paladin rework, Shadow Priest rework, Fire Mage rework.
yeah,
Actually, Mage reworks across the board, but Fire
yeah,
got the most. And while Fire feels like in terms of gameplay is much smoother, much less clunky, feels a lot better to play. Numerically, all those specs do really well,
exactly.
even without
Yeah,
augmentation.
yeah, yeah. So I mean it's it'll be interesting to see what Blizzard decides to do moving forward. I mean, I think they'll continue like they have all expansion, like make tweaks every couple weeks, right? See the
Yeah,
tweaks, see the data come back, and see what they might need to change. So I'm assuming this won't be the end of it, but I mean, it's funny. Like they made the change already from a rating point of view to like limit the reason you'd stack a bunch of evokers or augmentation evokers. And so I'm wondering what what they do in 5 mans because again, you're right. Like the augmentation of Evoker enables a lot of this, but at the same time, like all those other classes are still strong
Yeah.
in 5 mans.
This is
Yeah.
this is kind of like you see this problem. Well, I'm familiar with this problem in other games, like other contexts, like in Magic the Gathering, which is a trading card game. Sometimes you'll have a card that comes out and it basically defines a new deck that is just the thing to beat. And sometimes it's not so much a single thing that is the problem, right?
Hmm.
And sometimes it's just that there are multiple things that are too strong together that together make something that is unbeatable, right? And that's kind of what's going on here. You have Augmentation Evoker, which is a multiplier on other things. It is taking other things that you have in your group, and its contribution is just a percentage of those, basically. And you put every OP spec in the group comp.
Exactly. Yeah.
The only one that I would
Yeah.
argue that is maybe not OP that like didn't really get a lot of changes is Guardian Druid.
Right.
And it's certainly the strongest tank for dungeons. I don't think there's any doubt about that. I don't know if I would call it like broken or anything. It's just really good.
Exactly.
I wish
Yeah.
Brewmaster were on that level where some of these other ones I'm more like, maybe they should just nerf fire mages. Again.
Exactly. Exactly. Um, but yeah, so I mean, I don't have too many. I don't really have anything else to say on like the God Comp stuff, other than to me like the worst part about it is just like the whole titles thing. I think to
Yeah.
me is like the issue around a lot of it. I think Blizzard will fix it. They'll get it close. It'll be what it is, right? But I think at the end of the day, it sucks for those teams that want to push and
Yeah.
just not able to make up ground because you didn't do it in that week that everything
Yeah.
was crazy
There's
overpowered.
so like
So
in PvP there's rating decay if you can't camp
yeah,
your rating because there's rating decay if you just play. But that's not how Mythic Plus rating works, and then historically it just hasn't mattered because the deeper you get into a season, the higher people are able to push. So if you
right,
want to get that rating, you have to keep pushing. But if they nerf this comp too hard and make those key levels undoable, uh, people may just be able to camp their rating.
exactly.
We'll
Yeah,
see. We'll see.
we'll see what happens. Um,
Speaking of the combat log,
yeah, we went there. Yeah. So speaking of combat log, we saw a preview of a new Warcraft Logs feature. I guess is the best way to call it. I guess it's almost like a damage meter overlay is I think the best way to describe it. And so it was basically highlighted is essentially being able to show you like in near real time, we'll say, because we'll talk a little bit about that. The ability to see like the augmentation evoker's contribution. So in a very much like a details or I guess that's the main one. Recount was the older damage meter. I don't know if that's still maintained, but in a details manner, like details does in game, showing you damage. This will show you similar damage, but with the augmentation evoker's contributions all attributed to the augmentation evoker, not just to the individual player. So it should mirror more like the normal way that Warcraft logs would look. And yeah, so they debuted it. Or Wowhead did sort of a little bit of overview. A couple tweets about it came out, and it looks really cool. I'm super excited for like this idea. I didn't realize how quickly it updated, which was I think
I
the
didn't
biggest thing.
either,
Yeah,
actually.
so it's funny, and this when we talk about combat logs, like my experience with combat logs, at least reading them, stems back. It's been a couple expansions. I think MOP was like the last time I got heavy into like actually looking at a specific combat log that's generated. And at that point, if I remember, it was like multiple seconds, like 10, 15 seconds between writes, and even
Yeah,
longer about when the combat log on disk would get updated. So when we're talking about this, what we mean is like the WoW client writes combat data out to a file in your logs. That's your combat log.
yeah,
But it doesn't do it immediately when the event fires in your client. There's
yeah,
always a delay of some sort. And the previous delays were, seconds, like 10, 15 seconds long. At least that's what I remember. But nowadays it's like milliseconds
yeah,
in terms of the delay. And I think most people, at least from my understanding, is it's essentially it'll write out to disk after a certain number of events, or like typically say like once a buffer fills, it'll write that buffer to disk, flush it, and then fill it up again. And sort of that's how it goes. And with the amount of events that fire in like a raid setting or any sort of combat setting nowadays, it doesn't always have to be a raid. Those rights are essentially almost instantaneous. It's like they're
Yeah.
milliseconds between the actual file getting updated. So all Warcraft Logs is doing is what it always does. It's reading that file, and when it updates, it does the reattribution right in client and shows you in a very details like way, but just in a damage meter looking way.
Yeah.
Um,
So
which is
just
cool.
a note about the like way that the combat log is written, that that sort of the combat log updates slowly, I think has been kind of tribal knowledge in the theory community for years and years and years. It's just always been, I don't like, basically people didn't revalidate that it was still true.
Yeah, I
And
didn't.
the first that I learned of it potentially not being true is last year Warcraft Logs added a feature. If you have competition mode on for your guild, you can use real-time log uploading, which just uploads the current fight that you're doing in the middle of the fight, so that if, for example, it takes you 30 seconds to go from calling a wipe to actually wiping, right? You don't have to wait 30 seconds to go and start looking at the fight. It's still not instantaneous because of the Warcraft Logs server taking time to process the events. Um,
Mhm.
but that's actually that delay is more from the Warcraft log side, where we intentionally throttle it because we don't want to be reprocessing the fight all the time. Um, Not because the combat log is inherently throttled to like only update every 10 or 15 seconds. And that was the first time that I heard that actually, maybe this is really fast now. Um, the damage meter, I think, really brought things to a head. So the I think there's two things going on here. One, uh, I think that there is some pushback from people that want the support spec, like in the community. Like people have like a fantasy of a support spec being a spec that makes other people better, right?
Mhm.
And so having like your damage meter just show you like a normal DPS kind of breaks that fantasy, because then you look at it and you just feel like a normal DPS.
Right. Yeah.
Um, but also, if the combat log writes this quickly, a damage meter is perhaps the most benign thing you could do with it. Like, okay, full disclosure, I work for Warcraft Logs. I have not worked on the damage meter feature at all. Everything that I know about it comes from other people. Um, so, but like, I think initially I assumed that, we knew from the real time stuff that it was writing faster than like every 10, 15 seconds. I didn't realize
Yeah.
it was 200 milliseconds, 400 milliseconds,
Yeah.
which is what people now revalidating our assumptions in the community, not even just, at work, but people in
Yeah.
the community revalidating, wait, how fast does it actually write? And one of the things that's come out of that is somebody wrote a thing called Outside Auras, and they posted it on GitHub with a proof of concept that does the basically implements the Neltharion assignment week aura. For
Mhm.
those that aren't aware, the volcanic hearts um, on Echo of Neltharion are a private aura, so you cannot tell in game who has them except for privileged pieces of Blizzard code. So you can like show the debuff on raid frames. You can show if you
Yep.
have the debuff, but weak auras can't actually tell. So weak auras can't know. So the way people actually interact with this mechanic on Mythic is that you have a raid frame shown that lists all the players in your raid uh, in a specific order, and then when Volcanic Heart goes out, if it's on you, it'll show up next to your name, and you count how many of them show up above you. Like you count how far you are down in the list, and that's the spot you go to on a map. So you have two different weak auras going on. One that's a map that has numbered locations, and one that's the raid frame that is just creating a second raid frame. Like if you've
Yeah, it's a list. It's basically just a list with like the
yeah,
debuffs pop up next to it.
it,
It's
it's
very dumb.
it's
Dumb.
just like if you had like the default raid frames, but instead of it being like in groups, it was just literally top to bottom, just in a single list. Um,
Mhm.
and it's very clunky. It's very annoying. The mechanic sucks, And this automatically assigns it outside the game because private auras still get written to the combat log. And because the combat log writes so frequently, so they've got a number here, around 400 milliseconds is what they were seeing for combat logs on heroic Niltharion.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is, and then the other interesting thing, and this is where it gets a little like the arms race now continues, right? Like what we thought weak auras was the arms race, but the potential application of this is like if it writes that quickly, again, you gain access to a bunch more data that's not just in the game anymore. Like private
Yes,
auras is one of it, but like there's a lot of other information in the combat log that you get about that isn't easily readily available in game. Like the class, like the example that jumped up to my mind was the Archimon map
right.
or Archimon
Position,
radar, I guess they called it, because you get a bunch of positional data
yeah,
about not only yourself but all of your raid members around you, which means you can then do overlays about moving you into a specific position because you know everybody else is, and then like that heart weak aura, which is a very simple in the proof of concept, like 1, 2, 3, becomes a no, you move your character to this position, like on
yeah.
a map,
So
right?
what? There's actually those of you that remember like Ninth Endra, that was the first place this came up. Ninth Endra had a like mini map thing very briefly, and then in Emerald Nightmare they turned off position information in game. Basically, you could
Mhm.
not no longer write uh, position weak auras. Range checking became very limited because otherwise you can use range checks to re-implement information with some geometry. It's not easy
Mhm.
geometry, but it's very doable. Um, and so they turned all that off because of the Archimon weak aura, which was from the previous tier. And I will say, position information in the log does have a bunch of limitations. You don't get exact positions all the time. When you get a position, it is exact, but you only get them in certain situations. You do get a lot of them, which is how the Warcraft Logs replay works. So if you've used the replay tab on Warcraft Logs, you know, you can sometimes see quirks where like somebody just hasn't had their position information updated in a while and it just looks like they're standing there, right?
Yeah, which I mean, to be fair, like at least when I was deep diving, is like a lot of events have position information. So you're right. Like it's not
Yes.
like always exact, but like
Anything that has player resources or like anything that has resources for something generally will have the position info. So if it
which is
does
generally like
damage or healing to the target that is not like a non-zero amount of damage or healing to the target, it will usually have the information you're looking for. So you basically only lose that position information when someone is been full health for a while and isn't getting damaged. uh,
exactly.
which because they use damage over time effects, like raid wide damage over time effects, so frequently in raid, basically means you always have player positions updated within a second or so. Because like if you
Right.
look at Sarkareth, there's literally a persistent dot for the entirety of phase 2 and phase 3 where you just get people's position written out because they take damage every second from this dot.
Yeah. Exactly. And that's I think that's the so like that's the talk about the arms race, like that's the arms race of like potentially these outside weak auras or outside auras, however you want to describe it, right? Like reading the combat log. It offers essentially almost unlimited possibility, right? Like the idea is like unless Blizzard changes what they're writing, they've limited what the in-game API will present to add-ons, but now you're writing an external program that
Yeah.
just reads a text file essentially.
Those of you
And
that
so,
Yeah, those of you that are familiar with the Final Fantasy rating scene will know about Cactbot and what that could do, which is basically this. It is weak auras for the combat log, but the combat log for Final Fantasy has very few limitations because it's actually implemented outside the game by a tool called ACT. Um, well, it's more complicated than that, but basically there's virtually no limitations because it exists outside the game, and so you can do all kinds of stuff. Um,
right.
and you just like that's now what we're looking at with WoW.
Yeah, which is interesting that it's taken this long for this to be a thing. Cause like, I mean, Warcraft logs, you guys like Warcraft Logs is the largest, one of probably the largest third party site that talks about. I think it's Wowhead
Yeah.
and Warcraft Logs, probably the two largest in terms of like a third party site that talks about WoW or has an interaction
Right.
with WoW, right? And like building this sort of again puts the spotlight on it, and then puts a bunch of smart people trying to figure out, okay, how can I use this to do
Yeah.
interesting things? It's not always nefarious, right? I think there's a nefarious component to this, which we don't probably need to get into bigger. But if we think about from a PV rating point of view, like the 300 millisecond, 400 millisecond is a single player. That's not the same. It does not every combat log writes at the same time. You get a
Yeah.
raid full of 20 people. You basically have near real time data potentially,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
With the offsets. And if you can put together a program that can sync all of the updates together and then spit out, hey, this is the action that's taken when something happens, get that to 19 or 20 people. It's an interesting time, but at the same time, it becomes a massive arms race again between
Right. This is what
Blizzard
they
as a
were
developer
trying to
and
solve with private auras, which,
exactly.
like, Neltharion is an extremely problematic fight in that regard,
Mhm.
where they were trying this private auras thing, and Neltharion, by its very existence and design, forces people into trying to circumvent private auras in any way possible because of how how problematic the fight design is. Like, I guarantee that, like, and again, this is I'm speaking in personal capacity here. No, I don't have any like insider info about, you know, teams or anything like that, but I would not be surprised if this had been discovered prior to the Echo of Neltharion in the world first race. We would have seen map overlays for and
Oh yeah.
assignment overlays for Echo of Neltharion, because the mechanic is bad. And
Yeah.
it's not bad in like a fundamental can never be good sense, but it's bad in its current iteration and needs to be changed. The only reason it hasn't been changed, I think, is because a lot of the difficulty of the fight rests on this super shitty mechanic. And if they make the mechanic not super shitty, the fight goes from being like 150 pulls for a like decent mid-range guild to
Hmm.
being like 50 pulls.
Yeah.
Because it's the
Yeah.
only
No,
hard thing.
exactly. Yeah. No, and yeah, it's yeah, I mean that I 100% agree with you there. And then now it's just it's in my mind like what is all the cool stuff that potentially comes out of this if this stays in the game, right? Because like the idea is
I don't
like
think it stays in the game. I just straight up,
yeah,
like, again,
I would agree.
I'm not, no insider stuff, but I
No,
don't
I mean
think this
like
stays in the game. It's too powerful. It's just
yeah,
like they already don't want, like, they're already pushing back on the power of weak auras. This is way more powerful than any of that.
yeah,
And
exactly,
actually, because of the fact that you're not constrained by in-game stuff, right? You're not constrained by the limitations of processing stuff in-game. There are things that you got to be careful doing with weak auras, because if you're running a weak aura script, it's actually blocking the refresh of the game's display. You can't really do anything complicated with that. I mean, that's wrong. You can do complicated things, but there's limits, and if you cross
how
those limits,
complicated.
people's frame rates suffer, and then you just have a trade-off of doing really complicated weak aura stuff or having good frame rates.
Exactly,
This, you could do it in a completely different thread. You could do way more complicated stuff. You could offload work to a server somewhere.
exactly,
There's
exactly, and just get
so many things, so they're so much more powerful.
yeah,
This is
which is I
just,
mean
they can't leave this in the game.
no, which is I mean it sucks that I would agree with you. It sucks that we're probably not going to see the extent of like what crazy stuff people can think up of, but I mean it is a cool, at least to me. I don't agree with it. I think they do need to change it, but like the thought of like, hey, maybe it becomes an over like maybe it actually plays the game for you. Like there's an overlay that's like throughout the entire fight is scripted, and so all you have to do is move to those positions. Like imagine like this is very reminiscent of they used to. I mean, way back in classic,
The VR
there was
add-on,
a the VR add-on, yeah,
AVR,
the
yeah,
AVR, which like essentially did something similar where like if someone got a debuff, it would overlay like the radius of that debuff. It was like an explosion, and they could move out just enough
yeah,
before we had like circles and projected textures and stuff like that. So yeah, so I mean, the power of this is like I agree, extremely powerful and like potentially, I mean not potentially, it's game breaking, right?
Yeah.
And it's I would say that it generally it sucks because of like it sucks that this came out on the back of like this interesting damage meter type thing or like this
Yeah.
interesting concept of like filling in a
There's
gap of like being able to show in game what logs show.
yeah.
Um and so that sucks that hey the idea like that idea potentially dies like I know you don't know like the extent of it but like to me like yeah the idea of having this damage meter in game sort of dies now unless they update the in game events right
Yeah.
at that
I
point.
I mean, I think that there is a middle ground that doesn't go full nuclear and make it the damage meter non-functional, right?
Hmm.
Like, and that comes down to what are the technical requirements for a weak aura kind of thing to be useful versus what are the requirements for um a damage meter to be useful, and because they're not the same. If so, Volcanic Heart on Echo of Neltharion is a debuff that lasts 7 or 8 seconds, right? If
Hmm.
the combat log writes out every 5 seconds, then on average, if you were waiting for the debuff to show up in your outside aura,
Hmm.
then you would have about 3 seconds to respond and get to your spot, which is just not enough time. On the other
Hmm.
hand, a 5 second refresh on your damage meter is perfectly acceptable. I think 5 seconds is honestly still in the makes me very uncomfortable range in terms of like what outside auras would be capable of doing.
Right. I think well, but then you have to think about the fact that right now combat log writes are not consistent across the raid. So if everyone is running a combat log and it updates at different 5 second intervals and you can centralize that data somehow,
I
you
I,
still have near
I think
real time.
oh, so that's the kind of thing that maybe like a race to world first guild could do by getting everybody in the same location, and basically
Yeah.
nobody else would be able to do because of network latency, right? Like we had to swap our raid leader out last night on Starcraft,
Hmm.
and they were trying to they did the countdown sort of stuff like when to go back and drop your bombs on the first intermission or when to come up from the second intermission, and their countdowns were just like 2 seconds off because of stream delay, and so we had to switch to
Gotcha.
people in game doing it, and like that's not the actual amount of latency that you would be dealing with. You would be dealing with more like now you're adding on hundreds of milliseconds of latency every time, and probably also dealing with the fact that even if like I don't know, I would have to do some math to see whether it would actually work out to. I would say it's probably not usable at that point by anybody except the world first guilds. But then that actually just
Yeah.
further entrenches them as being the world first guilds because nobody else can do that.
Exactly. Or I
Uh,
mean, or
but I
they
mean,
yeah.
you could go even
The
farther.
rabbit the rabbit hole's there. That's it. That's my only point is like the
Yeah,
rabbit hole is then there because then you
yeah,
get into well maybe I'm technical enough I'll just set up a service that people can pay me for and it's a
yeah.
central server you plug in your details and like set up this little client and then you pay me $5 a month and I'll centralize your data and do overlays stuff like that.
And
So
I think, but then there's also just like if they just made it 15 seconds, right?
yeah, I mean there's a number that it writes out that I think makes sense and maybe that's the simple solution.
Yeah.
But
Like if it's
again,
15
like
seconds, I would still like I guess I'm a bad example because I don't even keep the damage meter in game open in combat. I find it too distracting.
yeah.
Um, so I don't keep that open at all. So I wouldn't use any damage meter actually outside of combat. I just go and look at the log after it. It's fine.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but like 15 seconds, you just can't use that. You just can't use an assignment week or the odds of just entirely missing it and having no assignment at all, or the assignment appears with 1 second left on the debuff, you just can't use it
Yeah.
because
Yeah, and then you
reliability
get
is a big part of like a weak aura, right?
oh yeah, no, 100%. I mean, yeah. Yeah, but then you get into the reason why it's writing out every zero point 0.3 seconds now. And is
Yeah,
that a buffer issue? Is that like an underlying like just
I don't know.
client? Yeah, like that's where you get into like can Blizzard even change that number?
Well, there's
Right.
there's some things. So like on the WoW analyzer end of things, there is an interesting issue that came up. So when you request events from the Warcraft Logs API for a single like person, it'll just send you the events. And it doesn't force you to paginate things as long as you follow certain thing. Like I don't like it technically, but as long as you do certain things, it'll just send you all the events, and you don't have to paginate or anything like that, which is great for WoW Analyzer. It makes it really easy to do stuff. And if you do the request for like a dungeon for a typical person, it's like 5 MB of JSON, maybe up to 10. It's a
Mhm.
good bit of JSON, but it's not like an unreasonable amount of data to get over the wire. If you
Mhm.
have an augmentation evoker, it's 100 MB for bracket specifically. I've
Yeah.
seen that number for Brackenhide Hollow with an augmentation evoker, because they make there be so many more combat log events.
Gotcha. So it's yeah, it's all the support
So
events because
if
every
they're,
event is essentially like duplicated
yeah,
or
I don't
pretty much
know
replicated. Yeah.
if the I don't know how their stuff is set up for like determining when to write. I know how
Yeah.
certain things, like if you work it with low level like lower level languages, you will run into buffered input output systems, and there's a few
Hmm.
different ways that you can do it, and depending on how theirs is set up, there's different implications. But all of them, like having more events, basically means you write out more frequently.
Right.
And augmentation also may have just sent it into an overdrive. Like, I actually don't know. It would be interesting to go back and, well, I mean, we kind of can't. Like,
Can't. Yeah.
what happens if you just don't have augmentation evoker in your group? Does it cut the, like, does it double the buffer size? Is this something that's only usable with augmentation evokers in your group? If you have multiple, does the update rate get better?
That's true.
If you
Yeah.
stack augmentation evokers, do you get actual real time, like every like single digit millisecond output?
Yeah. And that would yeah, I mean I think that's the yeah, a little bit of the rabbit hole. It'd be interesting to see what happens, but yeah, no, it's yeah, to me it, it's yeah, it's a very cool thing that I didn't think was like I said, didn't think was possible.
Yeah.
And it's cool that it ended up being it. It just
Yeah, I mean,
the
literally, like as all this stuff was happening, somebody asked me directly, like, can this be used for maps? And I told them, I don't think so, because I think the combat log is too inconsistent in its rights,
mhm,
and then had to get corrected by somebody because they checked. And
yeah.
it's not, so like I just learned of this in the past couple weeks. And I think that's
Yeah.
the case for a lot of people, like historic, like literally for 15 years the combat
It was
log
slow. It
was
was
too slow.
unusable for yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
unusable for real time stuff. And like now, yeah, now that it looks like it is, it's sort of yeah. And like just the it's now been shared with the world like the world of people who care
Yeah.
about this stuff now know about it, right?
Honestly,
And so
like much in the same way the augmentation evoker coming in kind of shitting all over Mythic Plus is not great, but at
yeah.
least like it didn't come in and completely destroy the world first race, right?
Yeah.
Like small consolation for the people whose titles are now much harder to get, but at least it didn't screw up the raid tier.
Yeah, which
Uh,
and now they have, now they have a couple months to sort of fix that.
right.
So
Same deal here. Like, you know, at least like I would rather it happen this way and they fix it before the next raid tier, and then we never have to deal with the drama around, you know, Liquid creating an out of game overlay for Volcanic Heart,
yeah,
right? That solves the
exactly.
mechanic and winning the race off of that. Like,
Yeah, exactly. No, yeah, it's good timing to give Blizzard a chance to fix this in a way that hopefully doesn't break the damage meter and like but does break any sort of like real time in game like
yeah, I
overlay type
mean,
stuff. So
I hope it doesn't break the damage meter for, work reasons. It would suck to have invested that work in making that time in making it work, and have it
mhm.
just like neutered because the combat log nerfs. But if push came to shove, I would sacrifice the damage meter to not have to ever deal with outside auras.
100, yeah, I agree. I don't
Like
work there, but
as
I
a
would
player,
yeah.
I would rather not have the damage meter,
It's
and
all right.
also not have any outside auras.
Yeah, it's already. I mean, I was gonna say it's already hard enough to get my raid to install the same week aura so that we
Yeah,
can do fights. Like, I can't
yeah,
imagine getting someone to like install a third party program and like get it set up with any sort of accuracy. So,
yeah.
but yeah, no, we'll see how this shakes out. Definitely, probably some updates in the next couple months on combat log stuff and how this sort of looks. But cats out of the bag now that this is how probably
People are
might
already
have been out of
talking
the
about
bag.
people are already talking about using this for like people that are still progressing Neltharion. Like I see in the raid lead Discord, people asking about using this,
Yeah,
and nobody
I mean,
knows like what I mean. We'll see what the experience is like of people
yeah,
using it, I guess, because people are gonna. It's
yeah.
better
I mean, to
than
be
the
fair, I
existing
might
system.
and for me personally, I might just install it and check it out. Like, not
Yeah.
use it to do any sort of
Oh,
actual stuff, but
important note, just because I feel compelled to bring this up, WoW still has Warden. For those that don't remember what that is or have never heard of it,
yeah,
Warden is a thing that basically tries to monitor other programs on your system. If that sounds invasive, it's because it is, and can be used. There was a huge like Honor Buddy ban wave for those that remember back in the day. Honor Buddy was this botting tool that people used to farm honor, and then it
mhm,
grew into other forms of botting as well. But like literally hundreds of thousands of players got permabans for running that. I don't know if this would get picked up by that. There's obviously, like the Warcraft Logs uploader is a separate process that
right.
obviously doesn't flag you because you're not going to get banned for running that. Um, but be
But
cautious.
I mean,
I
the
don't.
problem is
I don't think
it
that they
does.
would.
Yeah,
I like.
my
I don't know enough about the implementation details of Warden. Right. I don't think they would do a
yeah.
ban wave for this. But
I would
also,
I would hope not, just because like it's just doing what Warcraft Logs does.
yeah. I
Like, it's just
mean,
reading a file that the game's already writing out. So yeah,
yeah. But yeah, it's certainly something. I
yeah.
Yeah, we've gone long. Yeah, I don't know. It's
It'll be an interesting time there. I think the next couple, like maybe weeks or even months, in terms of like leading up to next raid, to see how, I think two things in my mind: how hard they go on sort of correcting this,
Yeah.
and how much notice they give people that they are going to correct this. Because I think those are two important things. Because
I
like,
honestly was a little bit surprised to not like log on for work this morning and find that it had already been patched.
yeah, or some sort of blue post in terms of like us looking at this,
And
right?
they still could with the time that we're recording this podcast. It's currently noon
Yeah,
in Pacific time. They typically deploy hot fixes around 3 p.m. Pacific time. We may well just like 3 hours from now have a blue post or a
yeah,
wowhead post that just says like this has been changed and now outputs every 60 seconds or something
exactly,
ludicrous.
exactly, yeah, yeah. So that's still a possibility, but no, it's yeah, it's a cool new thing this week that popped up. Lots of a little I'd say mini drama about it, but it definitely is a sort of a little bit of a Pandora's box in terms of
Yeah.
the power of this. We haven't seen, I mean,
Uh
to be fair, we haven't seen something this powerful since, weak auras in, what was that, WAD was all the changes? Yeah.
yeah, I
Like
mean
at the end of
honestly,
WAD. Yeah.
this is I mean, okay. Weak auras at that point, maybe on par with this power level. Like, there's multiple nerfs that went into weak auras, like the
Yeah.
removal of position information, the lockdown of friendly nameplates, you know, um, and more recently private auras. Like all these things reduce the power of weak auras. But honestly,
Right.
this outside aura thing is more in line with AVR.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, which is, yeah, been years since that was a
Yeah,
thing. So,
yeah,
um, well, cool. I think that is cool. It for the week. I don't
yeah.
think there's anything else major. We are a little bit over.
We are a little bit over.
Uh,
We are a
but no, yeah,
little bit over. That
yeah,
is where we will wrap things up, though. Thank you all for watching and or listening. I hope you enjoyed it. And if you did enjoy it and you want to support this podcast and the other work that goes on over at the Peak of Serenity, you can do that over at our Patreon at patreon.com/Peak of Serenity. And of course, come and join the Discord. It is the best place to wildly speculate about the impact of outside auras on rating in the future.
of course.
Of course. Uh, and in the meantime, uh, you know, don't get banned for using it.
For sure. For
For
sure.
sure. But that's going to be it for the show today. Thank you all for listening, and we will see you next week.
Bye.